king, you know?
He did, and you know, I'm just thinking, my goodness, Cook County, between R. Kelly and Jussie Smollett, they're
been a busy place
right now.
Yeah, no kidding. Out anymore.
He gave us a little bit just there, not too much.
But he loves his fans, and he promises that it's going to all get straightened out. Okay. All right, you heard it here first on America's News Headquarters. R. Kelly promising the world it's going to be okay. I'm Leland Vittert.
And I'm Kristen Fisher. Well, President Trump is set to release his 2020 budget plan on Monday. It's expected to include cuts to domestic spending as well as an increase in defense funding. So our Jillian Turner is back with more. You've been able to go through the entire budget by now, right?
I'm happy to report I spent the last hour reading through. No, I'm just kidding. But we will eventually, once we see the plan. The budget will come on Monday. That's just 2 days from now and a month past the statutory deadline. Something the White House blames on the partial government shutdown that lasted 5 weeks. Greasing the skids for the rollout, the president gave the state of the national economy a glowing review yesterday.
The economy is very, very strong. If you look at the stock market over the last few months, it's been great. And certainly since my election, it's up getting close to 50%, the stock market. So we're obviously very happy with that.
The administration projects $1 trillion deficits for many years to come, with a reduction down to $200 billion only in the 10th year. And then a balanced budget will come in 2034. That's 15 years from now. The Speaker of the House says she's unimpressed with the plan and that last year's Trump tax cuts have got to go.
This has to be revisited, not just because of the unfairness of it, but also the impact that it has on the budget. And what it means in terms of meeting the needs of the American people, whether it's investing in education, building an economy for the jobs for the 21st century, with innovation and allaying fears of globalization and innovation, what it means to America's workers.
The president's earmarked $750 billion for defense spending. That includes backfill funds for his border wall. He believes under this current proposal, he'd have enough money to complete it entirely by the end of 2020. Overall, the plan increased requests for some agencies, but cuts many others, like the EPA. So the next up for the budget, it goes to the House and Senate. Capitol Hill insiders say they're likely to hassle over the president's proposal until the next spending deadline, which comes up October 1st, at which point we'll be staring down the mouth of yet another government shutdown, Kristen.
Yeah, and I think House Democrats aren't going to like this budget plan all that much, but we'll see what happens.
That's a safe bet.
Safe bet. Jillian Turner, thank you.
We got the right animation. 2020 Democrats, they are on the trail. Busy weekend for them. Multiple candidates at South by Southwest. That's a conference in Austin, Texas. Others out on the trail in Iowa. Jeff Paul keeping track of them all. And by them all, we mean quite a few of them. Hi, Jeff.
Yeah, quite a few. And South by Southwest in Austin is no doubt the place this weekend for many of the Democratic presidential hopefuls. Senator Elizabeth Warren will take the stage in a few hours. Former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke will also be at the event for the premiere of a documentary about his Senate race and narrow loss to Senator Ted Cruz. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, though, kicked things off this afternoon in Austin, Texas. She took a few shots at President Trump, saying the American people are being governed by chaos instead of opportunity.
When I see the corrosive divide, instead of trying to find ways to bring us together in times of crisis, he finds ways to bring us apart. This is Donald Trump every single day. And so that is the number one thing on people's mind.
Farther north, Bernie Sanders is campaigning today at the state fairgrounds in Des Moines, Iowa. This is his third campaign event in the state, where he also campaigned earlier in the week in Council Bluffs and in Iowa City. Sanders continues to focus on the working class as well as younger voters, targeting issues like rising student loan debt. He told the crowd in Iowa he wants to make sure big companies pay their share in taxes, specifically targeting Jeff Bezos and Amazon. Sanders also mentioned other Democrats running for the nomination as he tries to separate himself in a field of hopefuls that continues to grow.
The nature of our campaign is not belittling people, it's not opposition research, it's not attacking other people, but it's a serious discussion about the important issues facing the American people.
Now, former San Antonio Mayor Julio Castro, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, and Washington Governor Jay Inslee will speak at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas on Sunday. Elsewhere in the country, California Senator Kamala Harris is campaigning in South Carolina. Leland.
Keep an eye on all of them. Jeff Paul. Jeff, thank you. Elizabeth Warren is proposing to break up big tech. One can imagine at a tech conference like South by Southwest, they'd have something to say about that. She said that companies have too much power over our economy and our society and our democracy. I want government that makes sure everybody, even the biggest and most powerful companies in America, play by the rules. Axios reporting that could include breaking up Amazon's purchase of Whole Foods and Zappos, Google's takeover of Waze and Nest, Facebook's ownership of WhatsApp and Instagram. With that, we bring in our panel, former Obama campaign spokesman Zach Friend from California, Jamu Green, Fox News contributor. Jamu, I understand you are joining us from South by Southwest. How's Elizabeth Warren's proposals going over with the tech billionaires down there?
Probably not well, but I think what is great about all of these Democratic candidates is, they are coming into the marketplace of ideas. They're certainly putting their positions forward. Elizabeth Warren is coming in as a policy
Jamu, nothing says candidate. Jamu, nothing says candidate of the people like South by Southwest. I mean, what a everyman's operation that is.
Well, I will agree with you that there is a certain kind of elite vibe, influencer, trend-setting vibe here. But, that's a great thing. There are some major companies that have launched here at South by Southwest. Yeah. I'm an Austinite, and I understand the appeal of the city and why candidates need to come down and talk to all of the diverse young people who have gathered here.
A lot are calling Warren's proposals hipster antitrust. With that, Zach Friend to weigh in. Elizabeth Warren calls this nerding out when she goes deep dive on all of the policies. That is sort of the opposite of what we saw in 2008 from Barack Obama when you were on his campaign, of the aspirational hope and change and allowed the voter to project their own policies on the candidate. Is Warren on the wrong track here?
Well, I do think that in some respects you actually need to be much more top line. I think that what people are looking for right now isn't this level of specificity, but actually something that speaks to the general needs of the country. For example, as we talk a lot about the Green New Deal, I think there's a lot of states that would like to have a New Deal for Forgotten America, something that focuses much more on economic populism. When you get into the weeds, you do lose a lot of people. It shows that she's got the chops. Yeah. Believe me, President Obama had the chops in the weeds as well, but people do connect more on the top line.
Real quick, we'll get Jamu to weigh in on sort of the larger points of this. Some of the policies that Warren has talked about pretty much in the weeds. The wealth tax, 2% on people over $50 million, 3% over $1 billion. She calls it the ultra-rich tax. Universal child care, debt-free college, a Green New Deal. It's pretty much something for everybody, Jamu.
Well, I think it is certainly aspirational to be putting your very specific policy plans forward. And the idea that the American people wouldn't want to understand where the candidates stand on these issues in these details, I think that shows a little bit of kind of how the media covers our presidential elections, our celebrity-obsessed culture, and in many ways, that's what got us Donald Trump. And there's one thing Democrats want in their candidate is someone who can beat Donald Trump. So hopefully we
Democrats
can
seem to agree
switch
on
the tide back to
Democrats
substance.
Agree on wanting to beat Donald Trump. What they don't agree on is how to do it or who should do it. This former Clinton staffer, pretty high up in the campaign, on Bernie Sanders and accusations that he is starting to enjoy the high life a little too much and demanding private jets. I'm shocked that while thousands of volunteers braved the heat and cold to knock on doors until their fingers bled in a desperate effort to stop Donald Trump back in 2016, His Royal Majesty King Bernie Sanders would only design to leave his plush D.C. office or his brand new second home on the lake if he was flown around on a cushy private jet like a billionaire master of the universe, said Zach Pettencass, who was director of rapid response for the Clinton campaign. Boy, Zach, nothing like a campaign worker scorned.
I know. Look, the difference between the shades of blue on these candidates is much less than the difference between these candidates and the President of the United States. It does us absolutely no good to relitigate the 2016 campaign or to cause these same problems in 2020. And for that matter, you generally don't complain about the officiating when you win the game. And so I think that a lot of this is sour grapes that we just need to move on from.
Yeah. Well, apparently some have not moved on from it. We're already seeing oppo dubs on a number of other candidates. Amy Klobuchar comes to mind when you think about that. Zach, Jammu, appreciate it. Jammu, get some barbecue for us down at South by Southwest. We hear it's a pretty nice place to be.
Come on down to Austin whenever you can.
I'm looking forward to it. Good to see you both. Kristen?
Thank you.
Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort sentenced to 47 months in prison this week, and he could face even more time because he has a second sentencing hearing on Wednesday here in Washington. Our Garrett Tenney joins us live with more. Hi, Garrett.
Hey, Kristen. Paul Manafort, he turns 70 years old next month, and at this point, his future is still very much up in the air. Next week, he will be facing a sentencing in a separate legal lobbying case in D.C. where he's facing 10 years in prison for charges of conspiracy against the U.S., which he pleaded guilty to in September. The judge could add that sentence onto the 47 months that Manafort was sentenced to this past week, or she could decide to have the sentences run concurrently. Even after this trial, Paul Manafort's legal troubles may not be over, though. The DA in New York City is reportedly preparing a case against him for unpaid state taxes and loans. State charges, which unlike federal ones, could not be erased by a presidential pardon. On Friday, President Trump said he has not discussed a potential pardon for his former campaign chairman, though.
I don't even discuss it. The only one discussing it is you. I haven't discussed it. No collusion with Russia. There was absolutely none.
The president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, meanwhile, is facing fresh questions about his congressional testimony. Fox News has learned staff for Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff traveled to New York at least 4 times to meet with Cohen before his public testimony last month. It met with him for more than 10 hours to discuss his testimony, including a range of topics which Democratic lawmakers ultimately asked him about at the hearing. A spokesman for Schiff said these kind of meetings are a routine part of congressional investigations, but House Republicans are suggesting it was witness coaching. This morning, former Whitewater Independent Counsel Robert Ray said even if they were legal, the meetings still raised some serious questions.
I'm not questioning the fact that it's appropriate for members of Congress to have sessions with the witness beforehand to prep the witness. What I am questioning, and what Ken Starr questioned, is, that ought to be a bipartisan function where both sides get an opportunity to find out information beforehand.
A source close to Fox News, a source close to this matter tells Fox News that Chairman Adam Schiff is pledged to release the full transcript of Cohen's 8-hour testimony behind closed doors, and without providing additional details, said the transcript will vindicate Cohen and implicate others. So as the president likes to say, we'll have to wait and see what happens, Kristen.
Garrett, thank you. And let's dig into this a little bit deeper with the Great American Alliance co-chairman, Eric Beach. Eric, thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Kristen.
So, Eric, let's start where Garrett Tenney left off, this issue of Republicans accusing Adam Schiff and his staff of coaching Michael Cohen before his big public testimony last week. Do you agree with those Republicans? Do you have a problem with it?
Well, I just don't think he did a very good job of coaching Michael Cohen, to be honest. I mean, what we heard out of that testimony was that there was no collusion between Russia and the president or his campaign, and Michael Cohen verified that. So I think Adam Schiff had a real problem on his hand, and I don't know, this may be the first time that, sitting member of Congress on the committee has coached a felon on how to testify before Congress. So I agree it should have been bipartisan, but really, I also agree that the result was not very good for Congressman Schiff.
Well, let's pick up on what you just said, because that is exactly what the White House and President Trump have been pushing this week in light of the Cohen testimony and the Manafort sentencing. They've been saying that, nothing that has come out of the Cohen testimony or the Manafort trial would indicate any collusion with Russia. But President Trump pointed to something that the judge said. He said that the judge said no collusion with Russia, but what the judge really said was that Manafort wasn't accused of collusion and that the trial was focused on an unrelated crime. So can President Trump and the White House realistically use that as a defense?
Yeah, because the Democrats the entire time have tried to draw on the parallel between Paul Manafort, who was convicted of tax evasion, versus, you know, the Democrats who have sought to make it about collusion, which there was nothing there about collusion. And you've seen some of the Democrats go away from the pending Mueller report. So I think the president has good messaging on his side because he realizes that the Democrats have overreached, and then you have 81 witnesses going to be investigated, if you will, by Chairman Nadler as well. So I think, again, pointing out this Democratic overreach from one party and I think is going to be healthy for the president, because I don't think this Mueller outcome will go against him.
Well, we should find out fairly soon. All reports indicate that the Mueller team should be wrapping up shortly. So let's talk about the possibility of pardons. I think it's pretty clear that President Trump is not going to be pardoning Michael Cohen, especially after that testimony last week. But there's a real possibility that he could pardon Paul Manafort, and he has not ruled it out. You're very close to a lot of folks in the president's orbit. What are you hearing?
Well, I think we ought to investigate the investigators at some point. I have no doubt that the investigators are, you know, prone to doing their job. And I have no doubt that Bob Mueller is an American hero, but he's not an elected official. And I think what you're seeing here is really an overreach, once again, by people that aren't not elected to office. And so to draw this parallel between Paul Manafort and the president is just wrong to do. And I think, you know, there's been public pressure that have gone to this sentencing, even though it's only been, you know, 3.5 years, 4 years of a sentence. So I think, you know, us as Republicans need to take a step back and allow the Democrats to continue to overreach. I don't think it's bad for us politically, but I do think it's bad for the country.
But you didn't quite answer my question there. Do you think President Trump is going to pardon Paul Manafort?
I don't. I think he should keep some options on the table if he finds that the investigation was clouded. But I don't think he will do so.
Well, and interesting to note that Paul Manafort did thank the judge during his sentencing hearing for a fair trial. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. Eric Beach, thank you very much for coming on the show on a Saturday. Appreciate it. Leland?
Elon Musk's security clearance under scrutiny, what his defenders have to say about that. And the grand jury returns more than a dozen charges against Jussie Smollett, what that means for his case. While the tornado cleanup from a deadly tornado continues across America's heartland, more severe weather on the way. Meteorologist Adam Klotz tracking those storms. Hi, Adam.
Hey there, Leland. Yeah, for the second week in a row, we're tracking storms moving across the southeast. They're going to be big thunderstorms, possibly some more tornadoes that do a lot of damage. I'm going to be tracking those storms coming up after the break.
The First Lady spending some time in Alabama on Friday, comforting the families of the 23 people killed during the powerful tornado that roared through a small rural town. Now, a new system could bring a new threat of severe weather to parts of the South today. Meteorologist Adam Klotz is at the Fox Extreme Weather Center tracking it all. Hi, Adam.
Hey there, Kristen. Yeah, this is a really large one stretching across a huge portion of the country. If you live in some of the northern plain states, this is a big snowstorm. Farther to the south, it's going to be thunderstorms. It's likely going to be tornadoes once again. We've got all the winter storm watches there from the upper Midwest stretching back into the plains. That's going to continue as snow falls throughout the rest of today into the overnight hours. Farther to the south, that's where this becomes a much more dangerous system, perhaps maybe some really big storms, similar to what we saw last weekend, firing up once again as the leading edge of this currently moving right across the Mississippi River, getting you closer to Memphis. Everything here highlighted in the red outline box there. This is a tornado watch that's in place, which means the conditions are right for tornadoes to fire up across this entire line. And actually within the last hour to 45 minutes, we had seen several radar estimated tornadoes. Currently nothing, but as we get later into the afternoon, we'll likely see these continue to fire up, continue to pop up as the daytime heating really settles in. So the severe threat this weekend, unfortunately, currently we're looking at Saturday stretching there across the Mississippi Valley, getting into portions of Tennessee and then Mississippi. However, if we begin to look towards tomorrow, this whole system is going to continue to shift a little farther off towards the east. And this is where we could see a tornado threat moving back into places that were already hit last weekend. So every one of these little pink highlights, those are where tornadoes touched down on Sunday of last week. Well, as you see this, a lot of those running right across some of the same areas. We're going to see a potential for severe weather for tomorrow, Kristen. So this is going to be a big system that we're paying attention to today and to tonight. But I think this is going to linger into Sunday night and Monday for a whole lot of folks, unfortunately, also.
That is not what we like to see for all those folks still recovering from the tornado last week. Adam Klotz, thank you. Leland.
Tech billionaire Elon Musk could be facing some extra scrutiny, all thanks to this clip we've played it before of him smoking marijuana. An official says that the Pentagon is now reviewing the SpaceX CEO's federal security clearance, including a form that requires applicants to disclose any illegal drug use. Musk recently resubmitted his security clearance form after smoking marijuana on the podcast last year. You might know that recreational marijuana is legal in 10 states and the District of Columbia. However, it remains illegal under federal law. And with that, we bring in Elon Musk enthusiast Kristen Fisher for her thoughts.
He's
not doing you any favors.
This is a tough one for Elon Musk and SpaceX because so much of SpaceX's revenue comes from these spy satellites, which SpaceX launches, and which are now potentially in jeopardy because of the security clearance review. So while it's just bad for SpaceX, it's bad for Elon Musk, and you know it's disappointing because they're doing so many things, and there are so many people that work for SpaceX trying to make this company great, and stuff like that makes it tough.
I have often said, if you're ever in trouble, find an attorney who will defend Elon Musk, like Kristen Fisher will defend Elon Musk.
Yeah, I will say what he did was legal in California, so you know this is the discrepancy.
Those SF-86s and those federal laws are just pesky little things. All right.
It's a loophole, a loophole. Coming up, we've got other stuff. I could talk about Elon Musk all day, though. A disappointing jobs report for February fuel debates over an economic slowdown. We'll have a business development expert weigh in on the outlook for the U.S. economy. Strong showing at the beginning of the year, with the U.S. economy adding just 20,000 jobs last month as unemployment fell to 3.8%. For more insight, we turn to PwC partner and business development leader Mitch Rochelle. Mitch, thank you so much for coming on and providing your insight. And you know, there were two big headlines this week that on the surface may not have seemed like good news for President Trump and his trade and economic policies. You got that jobs report and some big trade news, but you believe that those headlines may not be as bad as they seem. So let's start with that jobs report. It was the weakest report since September of 2017. But listen to how the top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, tried to spin it yesterday.
It's a very fluky number. It doesn't jive with any of the other things going on. And I think you have timing issues, government shutdown issues, seasonal issues.
He calls it a fluky number. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I don't know that fluky's in my vocabulary. However, you have to look at it over time. And I would say that last month was a little odd because you had the lingering effects of the government shutdown. You had some weather in January that didn't exist in February. Not to get too far in the weeds, but if you look at the three-month average, you're at 187,000 jobs. That's still pretty strong.
And there were 20,000 jobs added last month, which was better than what was initially expected, right?
Well, the expectation was actually in line with what we now have as a three-month average of about 180,000. So it did fall short. But buried in there, you had manufacturing jobs that were up. You had the unemployment rate falling, and you had wage growth at 3.4%. So there's really some strong things buried in that report. I think the problem is that headline number of 20,000 spun people's heads, and that's what really caused all the confusion yesterday.
Yeah, the headlines sure can change the meat of the story, that's for sure. Let's talk about trade, because the bad headlines that came out this week for President Trump are that America's trade deficit in goods with the rest of the world rose to its highest level in history, $891 billion. The trade deficit with China also reached a record high. Why do you think this is not as bad as the headlines might make people believe?
Well, one of the things, Kristen, is this dollar is very strong against other world currencies. So for that reason alone, and in fact, if you look at what China did early on in retaliating against the tariffs or the threat of the tariffs, what they did was their efforts to try to weaken their own currency against the U.S. dollar. So that tried to be a way to balance out the tariffs. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at what retailers did, they started purchasing goods well in advance of the tariffs. There were a lot of sort of aberrational things that happened during the year to widen the deficit. But buried in there is another nugget, which is our trade surplus for services, not goods, is on the rise. It's not rising as fast as the trade deficit for goods is falling. But the fact of the matter is we do have a trade surplus with services with the rest of the world.
Yes, but President Trump's goal has been to narrow that gap. I mean, mean, this is the opposite of that. And you have all these tax cuts, the trade war with China, the tariffs. I mean, haven't those policies that the Trump administration has imposed, haven't that made this worse?
But one of the things it's done, Kristen, is those policies have made our economy stronger. You have economies around the world that are weakening, which is having the effect of making the U.S. dollar stronger. And when the dollar is strong, it does shift the balance of trade a little bit, which is widening the surplus because it's cheaper to buy stuff abroad. Companies are going to have their supply chain abroad because it's cheaper than doing it here. By the same token, people aren't going to buy U.S. goods because they're more expensive using their own currency. So you really have to look at the dollar as being one of the things that's had a heavy influence during the year, and the dollar's strong because our economy is strong.
Understood. I only have a few more seconds, but just want to get this question in really quick because the Fed's next policy meeting is taking place in just over a week, and I'm curious how you think this latest jobs report could impact that and interest rates.
They've been pretty clear that they're not going to do anything with interest rates in the near term. And I think a 20,000 job report for February just reinforces that. They say they're data dependent. There's a data nugget, and they're probably not going to do anything in the upcoming meeting.
All right, more the same. Mitch, thank you.
All right, Kristen.
And coming up, Chris Wallace is going to have much more on the president's budget proposal when he talks to White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow tomorrow on Fox News Sunday. Check your local listings for time and channel. That's an interview you're not going to want to miss.
No, good stuff coming. Federal authorities investigating Martin Shkreli once again amid claims the former drug company executive is running his pharmaceutical company from behind bars. The Wall Street Journal says Shkreli, also known as Pharma Bro, has used a cell phone to keep tabs on his company while in prison. Prison rules forbid inmates from having cell phones and running businesses. He faces up to an additional year in prison if convicted. You're always able to find a redeeming quality in people in trouble. Any thoughts on this one?
I'm just wondering why he doesn't have that as his Twitter bio, Pharma Bro. I mean, that's pretty good right there. But
he's not supposed to have a Twitter account, but that's one of the charges is that he has like a social media account that's underground.
Yeah, but he's getting a cell phone somehow, so I'm sure he can have a Twitter account.
Great reporting by the Wall Street Journal.
All right, well, nearly 6 tons of U.S.-backed humanitarian aid is making its way to the Colombian border, where it is meant to cross into Venezuela. This is the 7th military flight loaded with humanitarian aid to attempt to make it into the country. The shipment contains more than 360 tons of food and medical supplies and comes as the U.S. continues to voice its support for opposition leader Juan Guaidó.
And with that, we bring in retired Major General Robert Scales, good friend of the program. It's nice to have you back, sir.
Good to be back, Leila.
We're sending U.S. planes and military planes to send aid to the Venezuelans. We have on record the National Security Advisor saying if something happens to Juan Guaidó, the United States is going to hold the Venezuelan government responsible. Do we have the assets in place to back those threats up?
Absolutely. Let's just review the bidding here. The United States Army has been in Colombia and in the rest of the region for almost 40 years. We have an entire Special Forces group whose sole focus is Venezuela and Colombia. But the president's playing this one right. There's no threat of direct military intervention. But our boy Maduro knows that we have assets all in the theater should he do something incredibly stupid like threaten Juan Guaidó. That would be an enormous mistake. We have to play the long game here. Eventually this regime is going to crumble under its own weight. What we have to avoid is getting too bullish on our approach to Venezuela. This has to be solved by the Venezuelans and by the Lima group in South America.
You and I talked about something that was said by President Obama now many years ago. He said that Assad's days are numbered. And you agreed with the idea that when the President of the United States says someone's days are numbered, you should be able to count that on a couple of hands and not get to your second foot.
The world doesn't work that way, as you know.
Well, but we now have on record U.S. officials saying Maduro's days are numbered. Is that a mistake?
No, it's not. Assad is so much different than Maduro. Maduro's in our backyard, 900 miles from Florida. The Russians don't even have a toe in this. And Maduro's regime is collapsing from every different corner of the country. The center of gravity, to use a military term, in this whole thing is the military. And we've seen the National Guard begin to crumble. We don't see the regular army on the border anymore, which means Maduro doesn't trust them. We only see the thugs thugs that are his hired cronies. We see the military moving away from the border area. I think his days are numbered.
All right, we'll check on how many numbers that is. Whether we got to get into double digits or only triple digits. Quickly on this, the president now coming out and saying, as part of his budget proposal and other times, that our NATO partners and others around the world are going to have to start paying more. Will this make a difference as we look at the strategic map? He called out a number of countries by name.
Yeah, I mean, here's some facts and figures for you. If Germany and France paid their full share, the delta in investment in the military in NATO would be greater than Russia's total investment in their military. These are huge numbers. Germany has 80 million people, the gross national product about a quarter of ours. If they invested just a little bit more, we would be able to thicken the border along in the eastern part of Europe and prevent any threat of the Russians ever going beyond the borders of the Ukraine, Poland, or the Baltic states. It's very important that they pay their fair share. And what's so interesting is right now the rumblings in local governments is that's probably what they're going to do.
Are they going to do that because they've been named and shamed by the United States, or because of the threat of Russian aggression has now ramped up?
It's all about the threat. The German army is in tatters. They have a long way to go to get back in the game. But if we can build
the U.S. Army's in tatters in some ways.
In some ways, we're down to 30,000 soldiers in Europe now. Think about that. It was 250,000 when I served there during the Cold War. No, our front line is now Northeast Asia and China, and it's in Central Europe and along the border of Russia, and we have to thicken our forces there in order to deflect the Chinese and keep the Russians from being aggressive.
Yeah, so many questions in terms of what our readiness is, even with our troops that are there. Right. General Scales, good to see you as always, sir. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Leland.
Indeed. All right, coming up, a little bit more on the Jussie Smollett grand jury. We're going to look at the 16 felony counts that the actor now faces and what this means for possible jail time.
A new CDC report describes a close call for a 6-year-old Oregon boy who had to spend 2 months in the hospital fighting tetanus, all because he had not been vaccinated. This was the first pediatric case of tetanus recorded in the state in more than 30 years. Now, lawmakers there and in Washington state are considering bills that would require children to get their vaccines after a measles outbreak in the region. Action people against vaccinations came out to demonstrate against, as you can see in this video right here.
A lot of questions about who pays that boy's medical bills, too. This was preventable. All right, moving on. An Illinois community mourning the death of a sheriff's deputy. Dozens of police officers lining the streets of Rockford Friday, escorting the body of 35-year-old Jacob Keltner. Keltner was killed in the line of duty during a standoff. He served more than 12 years with the sheriff's department there, and we thank him for his service.
Jussie Smollett is now facing 16 felony counts of disorderly conduct in connection to an alleged hate crime attack that police say the actor may have staged. Joining us from Chicago with more insight is federal litigator Andrew Stoltman. Andrew, he was originally charged with 1 felony count. Now he's facing 16 counts of disorderly conduct for filing a false police report. Help me understand, how do you get from 1 to 16?
Well, I think they had their initial investigation done. Now they've expanded it out. And you have prosecutors who are out for blood in this case. Chicago's reputation has been driven through the mud. You got prosecutors and the police force who are extraordinarily upset, and they're throwing the book at this guy, and they're going to try to bury him.
So what's the likelihood that they will be able to bury him? How solid is it, their case?
I think it's a really, really strong case. It should be a slam dunk. It should be a grand slam. You have 2 cooperating witnesses in the 2 brothers. You have 55 cameras that have caught part of the crime on tape. You have an outlandish story that most 3rd graders wouldn't believe. And you have somebody that likely isn't the most credible witness in the world. So it should be a strong case. But, Kristen, as we all know, prosecutors have blown a whole bunch of slam dunk cases for celebrities in the past.
That's very true. And, I have to bring in the other side here, because Smollett's attorney is calling this 16-count indictment prosecutorial overkill. Listen to what he said just yesterday.
Even if he were supposedly the one who had orchestrated this is an outrage. The fact that he maintains his innocence makes it even more outrageous. 16 counts. I defy anybody to find any indictment anywhere where somebody has brought 16 counts for being a victim of a hate crime, basically.
Does he have a point, or are you still not buying it?
No, I'm not buying it, but we do have to remember, Mark Geragos is an excellent attorney. He might turn this entire thing into a freak show in order to try to get his client off. And remember, we had O.J. Simpson, we had R. Kelly, we had Snoop Dogg.
It's already a freak show.
Well, I'm sorry, it is a freak show.
It's already a big circus. What more could he do?
And the best thing Geragos can do is put the Chicago Police Department on trial and say that they are racist, say that they didn't like him because he was gay, and try to turn the entire thing into a freak show. Now, I'm not saying it's going to work, but if anybody can do it, if anybody can present a top-flight defense, it's Mark Geragos.
So what's the possibility that Smollett actually faces any jail time here?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. He is likely to go to jail, and in large part because he's been charged. Yeah, he's been charged with 16 Class 4 felonies, minimum sentence of a year, maximum of 3 years, and Chicago wants to make an example out of him for prophylactic deterrent purposes so the next guy or gal who thinks about doing this doesn't do it.
I tell you what, you get charged with 16 counts of felonies. I'm going to think twice before I do something like that. Not that I would have ever thought to do that to begin with. Andrew Stoltman. Had to clear that one up. Andrew Stoltman, thank you so much.
Anytime. Thank you.
Leland.
All right. As you think about that, as daylight savings.
Strong showing at the beginning of the year, with the U.S. economy adding just 20,000 jobs last month as unemployment fell to 3.8%. For more insight, we turn to PwC partner and business development leader Mitch Rochelle. Mitch, thank you so much for coming on and providing your insight. And there were two big headlines this week that on the surface may not have seemed like good news for President Trump and his trade and economic policies. You got that jobs report and some big trade news, but you believe that those headlines may not be as bad as they seem. So let's start with that jobs report. It was the weakest report since September of 2017. But listen to how the top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, tried to spin it yesterday.
It's a very fluky number. It doesn't jive with any of the other things going on. And I think you have timing issues, government shutdown issues, seasonal issues.
He calls it a fluky number. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I don't know that fluky's in my vocabulary. However, you have to look at it over time. And I would say that last month was a little odd because you had the lingering effects of the government shutdown. You had some weather in January that didn't exist in February. Not to get too far in the weeds, but if you look at the three-month average, you're at 187,000 jobs. That's still pretty strong.
And there were 20,000 jobs added last month, which was better than what was initially expected, right?
Well, the expectation was actually in line with what we now have as a three-month average of about 180,000. So it did fall short. But buried in there, you had manufacturing jobs that were up. You had the unemployment rate falling, and you had wage growth at 3.4%. So there's really some strong things buried in that report. I think the problem is that headline number of 20,000 spun people's heads, and that's what really caused all the confusion yesterday.
Yeah, the headlines sure can change the meat of the story, that's for sure. Let's talk about trade, because the bad headlines that came out this week for President Trump are that America's trade deficit in goods with the rest of the world rose to its highest level in history, $891 billion. The trade deficit with China also reached a record high. Why do you think this is not as bad as the headlines might make people believe?
Well, one of the things, Kristen, is this dollar is very strong against other world currencies. So for that reason alone, and in fact, if you look at what China did early on in retaliating against the tariffs or the threat of the tariffs, what they did was their efforts to try to weaken their own currency against the U.S. dollar. So that tried to be a way to balance out the tariffs. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at what retailers did, they started purchasing goods well in advance of the tariffs. There were a lot of sort of aberrational things that happened during the year to widen the deficit. But buried in there is another nugget, which is our trade surplus for services, not goods, is on the rise. It's not rising as fast as the trade deficit for goods is falling. But the fact of the matter is we do have a trade surplus with services with the rest of the world.
Yes, but President Trump's goal has been to narrow that gap. I mean, this is the opposite of that. And you have all these tax cuts, the trade war with China, the tariffs. I mean, haven't those policies that the Trump administration has imposed, haven't that made this worse?
But one of the things it's done, Kristen, is those policies have made our economy stronger. You have economies around the world that are weakening, which is having the effect of making the U.S. dollar stronger. And when the dollar is strong, it does shift the balance of trade a little bit, which is widening the surplus because it's cheaper to buy stuff abroad. Companies are going to have their supply chain abroad because it's cheaper than doing it here. By the same token, people aren't going to buy U.S. goods because they're more expensive using their own currency. So you really have to look at the dollar as being one of the things that's had a heavy influence during the year, and the dollar's strong because our economy is strong.
Understood. I only have a few more seconds, but just want to get this question in really quick because the Fed's next policy meeting is taking place in just over a week, and I'm curious how you think this latest jobs report could impact that and interest rates.
They've been pretty clear that they're not going to do anything with interest rates in the near term. And I think a 20,000 job report for February just reinforces that. They say they're data dependent. There's a data nugget, and they're probably not going to do anything in the upcoming meeting.
All right, more of the same. Mitch, thank you.
All right, Kristen.
And coming up, Chris Wallace is going to have much more on the president's budget proposal when he talks to White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow tomorrow on Fox News Sunday. Check your local listings for time and channel. That's an interview you're not going to want to miss.
No, good stuff coming. Federal authorities investigating Martin Shkreli once again amid claims the former drug company executive is running his pharmaceutical company from behind bars. The Wall Street Journal says Shkreli, also known as Pharma Bro, has used a cell phone to keep tabs on his company while in prison. Prison rules forbid inmates from having cell phones and running businesses. He faces up to an additional year in prison if convicted. You're always able to find a redeeming quality in people in trouble. Any thoughts on this one?
I'm just wondering why he doesn't have that as his Twitter bio, Pharma Bro. I mean, that's pretty good right there. But
he's not supposed to have a Twitter account, but that's one of the charges is that he has like a social media account that's underground.
Yeah, but he's getting a cell phone somehow, so somehow. I'm sure he can have a Twitter account.
Great reporting by the Wall Street Journal.
All right, well.